We are live. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Ashley Norton, and I'm professor of medicine at Midland State University.
And what exactly do you teach there?
Well, I specialize in forensic toxicology, so mostly I'm working with that.
And what exactly is toxicology?
Well, toxicology is really just basically the study of the interaction between drugs, in my case most specifically alcohol, in the body.
What kind of other experience do you have in that field?
Well, I've published some scholarly journals on the issue, as well as I have background in it. I went to Brown University. I earned both my master's and PhD John Hopkins University, earned both my master's and PhD in forensic science.
Do you have any other professional certifications?
Yes. I am licensed operator and technician of the Intoxilizer 8000.
And how's the general community responded to your work?
Well, the community's responded very well. As I've said, several of my work has been published in scholarly journals.
How did you become involved in today's case?
Well, I was hired by the defense to do an independent investigation as to the conclusions of the state's report.
What all did you review in coming to those conclusions?
Well, I reviewed the bar tabs of Danny Dawson. I did my own personal interview with Danny Dawson. I've looked at the instructions used in the Intoxilizer 8000 as well as the results of the state's Intoxilizer 8000 report. And I also used a scholarly work, alcohol digestion. Shut up, Jesse. Sorry. I also used the scholarly report, alcohol digestion in the human body. So this is what I used.
And we'll talk about your conclusions from that in just a moment. But before we do that, could you let us all know how one goes about determining an individual's blood alcohol content?
Sure. Well, there's 5 main variables that you're going to use when trying to conclude someone's blood and alcohol content. First is the amount of alcohol consumed, the rate of ethanol elimination, the volume of distribution, time, as well as the volume and distribution. I feel like Rick Perry.
Okay. Yeah. Are you qualified to run and interpret those calculations you just mentioned?
Yes, I am.
And did you apply them accurately in today's case?
Yes, I did.
Did you have sufficient data to draw your conclusions on?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to reach those conclusions to a degree of sufficient certainty?
Yes, I was.
So in your professional opinion, what is the best calculation that could be gotten from that data?
The best calculation as to Danny Dawson's blood alcohol content on the night of the crash would be 0.08.
But Professor Norton, have you seen the state's report?
Yes, I have.
And what did they use when they came up with their numbers?
Well, they used the Intoxilizer 8000, but they also grossly overestimated the actual blood alcohol content on the night of the crash. There were several factors that they just failed to consider when determining the actual blood alcohol content.
And how could they have been so far off then?
Well, when reviewing everything, I came up with 3 main factors that they failed to consider that would have really led to a much higher blood alcohol content than what it actually was.
And what are those 3 factors?
Well, the first factor would have been bodily produced alcohols, most specifically isopropyl alcohol. And we can expect that Mrs. Dawson had a high level of isopropyl alcohol on the night of the crash.
And what would that have done to the results?
Well, I mean, it would have skewed greatly. Mrs. Dawson hadn't eaten for about 6 hours, so we can expect her blood sugar to be low. As this happens, a substance is formed in the body called ketone, which is really harmful to the body. So what our bodies do is they try to break down this ketone. One of the substances that they break it down into is isopropyl alcohol.
And what happens when the machine reads that isopropyl alcohol in the system?
Well, it can cause the machine to falsely read some of that isopropyl alcohol is alcohol that had been consumed by the person.
What are the other factors that you saw?
Well, the second factor is actually the Intoxilyzer 8000 itself. The Intoxilyzer 8000 uses a conversion ratio of 2.1 liters of breath alcohol to 1 cc of pulmonary blood. Now, a lot of recent studies done in the United States, as well as Europe and Japan, have found that the ratio can vary all the way from 9 liters of deep lung breath to 1 cc of pulmonary blood, all the way up to 34 liters of deep lung breath to 1 cc of pulmonary blood. So there's such a wide range. The machine only uses a set calculation.
And how does that affect the results?
Well, I mean, it can affect them greatly. Let's say that Mrs. Dawson was on the low records. Her actual blood alcohol content could have all the way to below 0.10.
And you mentioned that this could even vary within an individual.
Yes, it varies between individuals, but it also varies between the same individual at different times.
And how likely is it that Dawson may have had a variant reading at that point in time?
Well, Mrs. Dawson was at the elimination phase. So when someone is in the elimination phase of alcohol, generally their conversion ratios are lower. So we can expect the machine to have read a higher blood alcohol content than what she actually had.
And you said there are 3 factors, so what's the third?
Well, the third factor, and this came about when I was doing my personal interview with Mrs. Dawson. Mrs. Dawson had eaten cheesy fries and a burger earlier in the night, and she had been complaining of acid reflux. Acid reflux can really throw off these machines, simply because what acid reflux does is it regurgitates acids from the stomach into the mouth, and this causes mouth alcohol to be present. The presence of mouth alcohol can throw off the machine greatly.
And how exactly would it throw off the machine?
Well, as the machine's taking a calculation of your breath alcohol, if you have alcohols present in the mouth, it's going to cause the machine to spike. But if you have a chronic condition like acid reflux, where you chronically have acid regurgitation in your mouth, the presence of that mouth alcohol is going to cause a constant spike in the machine.
And how likely do you view this possibility to be?
Well, I view it as very likely. Mrs. Dawson was told me that she did in fact have acid reflux on the night of the crash. So we can assume that there was that mouth alcohol present.
And did anything else stand out to you from Dr. Avery Smith's testimony?
Well, yes. One thing greatly that stood out to me from his testimony today was when he was talking about when he took the reading of 0.19. It just didn't add up to the actions that Mrs. Dawson was displaying. And I think that since they failed to consider these 3 factors, these 3 factors help explain why Mrs. Dawson appeared to be a lot less intoxicated than she was. It was because she was less intoxicated.
And moving on to your conclusions from all this, then, was Dawson grossly intoxicated?
No, she was not. As I stated previously, Mrs. Dawson had a blood alcohol content of 0.8.
And how much does that make the state's estimation off?
Well, that makes it off by, I think, 1 or 11.
And what symptoms are typical of individuals around the defendant's blood alcohol content level?
Well, around a blood alcohol content of 0.08, we can expect most individuals to really underestimate their actual levels of intoxication. So it's very likely that Mrs. Dawson thought she was perfectly okay to drive and didn't really think that she was intoxicated when in fact she actually was.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.